community in crisis.
We've got to get to the root of the problem. I mean, it's not just giving out Band-Aid treatment. That's not going to solve it.
After promises of help from the feds and the province, we hear from community members and workers on the ground in Belleville on whether they think it'll be enough. And
this announcement shows a complete and fundamental lack of understanding around the core issues that are causing the crisis in primary care.
we break down the new healthcare funding deal, why some doctors say it won't address the severe staffing crunch in Ontario. Plus, we'll take you to Lunar New Year festivities around the world and close to home with big hopes for the Year of the Dragon.
This is CBC Saturday News.
Thanks for joining us. We begin tonight with the ongoing crisis in Belleville. It has been a tough week. The small city made national headlines with multiple overdoses in just a couple of days, one proving deadly. The mayor has declared a state of emergency. As Clara Pasica shows us, people living there are hoping all this attention brings some much-needed support and fast.
Here in Belleville, nearly 24 people overdosing in just 2 days earlier this week has left the community concerned and searching for solutions.
We've got to get to the root of the problem. I mean, it's not just giving out Band-Aid treatment. That's not going to solve it.
I don't know what the solution is. You know, they talk about more policing, doing something about the drug dealing in town. But how do you deal with that? I don't know.
The executive director of the John Howard Society for the region says the problem is much larger than this overdose incident.
This is a multitude of complex issues of mental health, of substance use, of homelessness, and it needs to have that type of approach where someone who is suffering in this type of environment is able to access those things when they need it, not when everyone else thinks they need it. And I think that is the difference. Our wait lists in this country for rehabilitation centers that are covered is too long. If someone decides I need help and I need it now, telling them that's great, you can wait 8 months, that's not feasible. They might not be here in 8 months.
The mayor says smaller communities need support from higher levels of government, and declaring a state of emergency was the way to get it.
It definitely got the attention of the upper governments. It's a catastrophe, and if you had this many people in a flood or anything like that, I think that action would be taken. As a municipality, we don't have the resources. This is a provincial issue and a bit of a federal issue, and it's time to act.
The move did get the Prime Minister's attention.
It requires us to step up and respond because these are tragedies that are hitting far too many families and communities that don't have the resources available that are even there in large cities to some degree.
The provincial government says tackling addiction itself has to be part of the solution.
We are developing a continuum of care to ensure that we build a system of supports to meet individuals where they are, no matter where they are in the province.
I spoke to several people who use some of the services provided at Bridge Hub here who didn't want to appear on camera, but they tell me that they've lost friends to overdoses. They say that more funding for rehab and other supports is desperately needed, and they're hoping that it comes through before any close calls turn into deaths. Clara Pasica, CBC News, Belleville.
Ontario's Chief Medical Officer of Health is warning every region to prepare in case this dangerous batch of drugs found in Belleville reaches other parts of the province. The manager of Toronto's drug checking service says there is a dire need for more services like harm reduction right across Ontario.
Toronto's drug checking service is currently the only established drug checking service in the province of Ontario. But what we know locally here in the supply is that in the 5 years our program has been operating, the unregulated opioid supply is becoming increasingly more contaminated, more volatile, and more potent. So it's not surprising that in Belleville and other communities across Ontario, across Canada, across North America, we're seeing these communities declare states of emergency and people unfortunately suffering the consequences of having to access drugs from an unregulated supply. I think we need to see bolder policy from both our provincial and federal governments in terms of making more harm reduction services available, like drug checking, like supervised consumption, like alternatives to the unregulated drug supply, like, for example, safer supply. I don't think communities like Belleville can do this alone. I think they need resources and response from policymakers.
In other news, the search is on tonight for 2 dogs and their owner after a Toronto woman suffered life-altering injuries when she was attacked by 2 off-leash dogs in the city's West End. She describes the terrifying moments as she was waiting at a bus stop when the dogs lunged. Her arm was broken and her face badly injured.
The one that faced me, he jumped in my face and he grabbed me here, which I have 12 stitches here. And I have this arm here, shoulder here gone, and my arm here was broken. It was twisted like this.
She says she's lucky to be alive and that the dogs didn't stop until a Good Samaritan pulled over, yelled at her to get into her car. Tonight, police say all neighborhood officers are on the lookout and they're sharing these images believed to be the owner and the dogs. Now, another witness saw the animals attack a cyclist and a resident in his yard. Meantime, police are investigating after a fight turned deadly early this morning. It happened at a Weston Road in Lawrence Avenue West just before 6 a.m. Police say they got a call about a fight inside that apartment building. A victim was found badly beaten and pronounced dead. The homicide unit is now on the case. There's no word yet on suspects or who the victim is. And taking you to a scene now in Scarborough from last night where around 9:30 p.m. a pedestrian was hit by a vehicle. Police found an unconscious man. Paramedics took him to the hospital where he later died. Now, investigators have not released any information on who the victim is or how old they were. Police say the driver did remain on scene and the investigation continues tonight. Family doctors across Ontario are weighing in on the new healthcare funding deal. The Prime Minister and Premier announcing the $3.1 billion details this week. Part of that goal is to help ease the severe staffing crunch. Patrick Swadden spent the day talking to doctors to find out whether they think the plan goes far enough.
Access to primary care is one of the huge priorities that we're talking about today.
And perhaps the main concern a $3.1 billion agreement between Ontario and Ottawa hopes to address. The Ontario Medical Association says 2.3 million Ontarians don't have a family doctor.
It's actually going to be closer to 4.4 million in Ontario in 2 years.
Dr. Sarita Verma says that's because 40% of Ontario's doctors will retire in the next half-decade, while others leave family medicine for more lucrative work in specialized practices.
It is astounding how many people cannot find a family doctor.
The deal mandates the province create more team-based family practices. Doctors, nurse, pharmacists, and social workers working together to assess patients and alleviate the complexity of care that often falls on family doctors, something long called for by the OMA.
And it all depends on how you create these family health teams.
Dr. Nadia Alam says this deal has potential, but the money needs to be spent wisely. She says primary care has been underfunded for a long time.
And that means not just supporting and funding family health care teams, it means supporting the family doctors who run their own businesses alongside those family health care teams.
But not everybody shares the optimism.
And so for years and years, family medicine clinics have been losing money.
Which Dr. Ramzi Hijazi says is because OHIP pays dramatically less than what it used to, and that's making it difficult for family doctors to keep the lights on at their clinics.
I've spoken to many who have a lease coming up in the next 2 years, and they say, I don't know if we're going to be able to afford to pay for our lease in 2 years.
And while Hijazi himself works in a team-based care setting, he says adding more of them won't work unless the government makes family medicine a more attractive prospect.
None of them are practicing family medicine because it's a failing business model. And so family doctors are working in hospitals instead. They're doing cosmetic work. They're doing extra training.
The $3.1 billion covers the first 3 years of a 10-year plan. many are hoping will begin to ease Ontario's worsening doctor shortage. Patrick Swadden, CBC News, Toronto.
To a big story on the East Coast tonight, an explosion has forced more than 60 people living in a seniors complex out of their homes. It happened in Sydney, Nova Scotia. The blast is being blamed on heavy snow that fell across the region last weekend. Officials say the snow on the roof of the building compromised propane lines leading into the building. At least one resident was seriously injured. The complex had to be evacuated, forcing several residents to stay in hotels overnight. Now, the acting fire chief has more on what's believed to be the cause of the explosion.
What it certainly appears to have happened is the seniors complex has solar panels on the roof, which are glass, and with the milder temperatures in the last few days, the snow had melted, and unfortunately, right above where they have the emergency generator and the propane supply for that generator, the snow slid off the roof, and we believe compromised that line, causing some damage, which caused the propane to leak. The unit directly in front of the propane tanks and the generator, we believe the window might have been open a little, and the tenant propane would have made its way into that apartment, that unit, and when the tenant, we understand they went to light a Scentsy candle or something to that of that nature, and there was an explosion.
Switching gears and much closer to home, a live look from Nathan Phillips Square in Toronto. Right now, a viewing party is gearing up for the Battle of Ontario, the Leafs versus the Senators. They're set for puck drop right after our show. Now, earlier this afternoon, Maple Leaf royalty took to the ice in the warm weather during the annual Leafs alumni signing session.
Who knows? We might be golfing next month, and from there on, who knows? But obviously, you know, I mean, there's a lot of talk about climate change and all that kind of stuff, but you know what? I don't mind this.
Yeah, the former Leafs captain was among the former Buds alumni in attendance. The warm temperatures continuing today, not quite the record high we saw yesterday, but also not nearly as cold as we're used to. Anwar Knight joining us tonight. Yeah, we were talking about 86-year-old records yesterday being broken, was it?
Close to 16 degrees yesterday. Unbelievable. It's the fifth warmest we've seen in terms of Toronto records. And yeah, it was a far cry from yesterday's temperature, but we had a lot of sunshine today, Shannon. You know, over 10 hours and 16 minutes of daylight. And relatively calm conditions. We're tracking this trough line. That's generating certainly some cloud cover, but dry to the south. The moisture is certainly along the trough and north of it. Even seeing some snow showers in parts of cottage country, but the core of the snow is well off, you know, in the nickel belt northward. Let's break down some of the numbers here for you, though. Currently still 5 degrees. We got up to 7 for today. 5 in Kemptville. We have 4 in Hamilton, 3 in London as we get into the overnight period. We can expect some temperatures to hit below freezing. But, you know, -1 in Ottawa, it should be -13. The organizers of Winterlude would love a deep freeze. Not in the forecast. 0 in Toronto, we should be at around -9. Even down to the southwest, you know, -2, -3, but well above where we should be. And as we start tomorrow morning, wind chills -4 to -8. So for Toronto, with a wind chill of -4, it will feel at least 10 degrees colder than it did this morning, let alone Friday. So that is going to be the trend, a push of some colder air moving in. And maybe I'm tracking another storm. I'll tell you if it's going to impact the GTA coming up in a few minutes. But now we'll send it back to you, Shannon.
Okay, we're due for it. Thanks, Anwar.
Okay.
Well, talking about warm temperatures across parts of Ontario, beyond breaking records, this winter's warm weather has had far-reaching effects up north. First Nation chiefs declared a winter road state of emergency in Anishinaabe-Aski Nation territory. In a press release, they say if temperatures don't drop enough overnight, ice won't thicken, meaning winter roads can't handle heavy loads of fuel and other critical large shipments. One First Nation has already had to close its winter road. Now they're calling on Indigenous Services Canada and the province to offer immediate support. More than 1 billion people around the world are celebrating the Lunar New Year this weekend with festivities marking the Year of the Dragon, a mystical creature symbolizing change and creativity. As Ithel Musa shows us, many are hoping the dragon will bring a change for the better.
It's an event marked around the world by more than 1 billion people. In China and many Asian communities, the start of the Lunar New Year is a time of celebration.
I'm just gonna celebrate with my family, and just gonna have some dinner.
2024 is the year of the dragon, the only mythical animal in the Chinese zodiac.
The dragon symbolizes change, new ideas of thinking, shows creativity and flexibility. But the key word to the dragon is actually one single word: change.
Which is precisely what some hope the new year will bring after soaring inflation, raging wars, and dangerous natural disasters.
Hopefully new change brings, better positivity throughout the world.
The economy is kind of crazy, but I think, every time there's a new year, it's always like uplifting and refreshing. It's a chance to start over for people.
But one financial expert says,
we're hoping for prosperity. We want our relatives, our friends, our family to make more money, but obviously in this economic climate, it may be easier said than done.
Choi says one positive thing is that many people aren't dealing with their hardships alone.
There are certain cultures where, it's a tightly guarded secret about how much you're making or what struggles you have. But I'm finding, especially with people my age, we're sharing more information. We're talking about the struggles we're dealing with.
And despite those struggles, some are hoping the Year of the Dragon, a symbol of power and prosperity, will signal better times ahead. Ithel Musa, CBC News, Toronto.
More countries are adding their voices to the growing list of those who fear a proposed new Israeli ground offensive could lead to a massive loss of civilian life. The assault is planned for Rafah, a southern city that more than 1 million people thought was a safe haven. Chris Reyes has more on that, but she begins with the brutal discovery of a 6-year-old girl killed in Gaza.
This is Wissam Hamada, the mother of 6-year-old Hind Rajab. I will not forgive those who let Hind down when they could have saved her, she said. The young girl went missing in Gaza City last month, shortly after this haunting phone call with emergency operators. I'm so scared. Please come, she said. Soon after that call, Rajab's vehicle came under Israeli fire, according to the Palestinian Red Crescent. The spokesperson said Rajab was found dead inside her family's car. The 6-year-old girl's fate, just another tragic example of a war with no escape. In Rafah, another Israeli airstrike. This woman lived in a house that was hit. Suddenly, a rocket fell on us, she said. Her family, including her sister, husband, children, and baby niece, all gone. Already the last remaining refuge in Gaza, Rafah is bracing for more assault and even more displacement. This after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ordered his military to develop a plan for evacuating the population and destroying Hamas fighters there. If the Jews enter Rafah, massacres will occur, said this man. Another said, we're confused because they want us to leave to go to another safe area, but right now there is no available place other than Rafah. The enclave's southern tip is where Palestinians were told to go when the north was evacuated at the start of the war. In Tel Aviv, thousands gathered to call for the release of hostages, but also new elections. This protester questioning the Israeli government. How does it seem reasonable to move 1.4 million from Rafah, she said. It's absurd. I don't think it's practical. It's sad, the point we have reached. From Hind Rajab's mother, it's also a point of no return. She had a dream to return home, she said. Yet another dream destroyed by a war that only keeps on raging. Chris Reyes, CBC News, New York.
Members of Toronto's Gaelic Football Club got to donate blood for the first time in Canada today. Many were not allowed to until recently, when Health Canada changed the eligibility for donors who were living in the UK, Ireland, or France in the 80s and 90s during the mad cow outbreak.
The changing of criteria has allowed us to welcome 5,000 new donors to Canada's Lifeline and our donor base.
In December, officials say the move allows them to welcome 5,000 new donors to the country's blood supply. And we're taking you back live to Nathan Phillips Square, where there's a crowd starting to gather to watch the Battle of Ontario tonight. That's the Leafs versus the Sens. Now, the viewing party is just getting started. It goes until 10 o'clock tonight. There's a free public skate. People already enjoying that, and some giveaways. Now, the puck drops at 7 o'clock. You can catch it right here on CBC. Anwar is back. All good things come to an end, I suppose. You're talking about a potential storm on the way.
Well, let's not put too much of a spotlight on it, but there is something I'm tracking. But let's deal with what the summer's saying, the good stuff, and that's the mild air, certainly. Shannon, out in J.C. Saddington Park, people were on their bikes walking along the lakeshore. Yes, still a hat and a coat needed, but a far cry than what we should be seeing. And you know what else has started up early? Also sugaring, the maple syrup production in parts of the province. Already one run done for some producers. They need a shot of cold for another run, and that'll also help us get some snowfall, because already we're well below where we should be, about 40 centimeters so far this season. Typically, we get over a meter, 111 centimeters. Now, as we get into the specifics, there's that trough I talked about. That's generating some cloud, some snow well north of us. It remains dry across the south. But there is another system that I'm going to talk about in a moment. Your forecast tomorrow, 4 degrees in Toronto, 3 in London, 3 degrees in Ottawa. That, again, is on the plus side. We should be around -1, and we'll get up to 4 degrees in Toronto, so 5 above the norm. The 7-day trend, some cooler air starting to push in. Seasonal is -1, so we'll get that by midweek. Seeing some flurries on Friday, but I'm tracking a nor'easter. Now, a couple of caveats here. The trend in terms of the models, tracking it further south, and it looks like it'll be, for the most part, a U.S. Northeast and parts of Atlantic Canada story. But this is, Monday through Wednesday. If this jogs just another 100 kilometers to the north, down to the southwest, could get clipped with some snow, maybe a western edge of the GTA, Mississauga, through the Golden Horseshoe. So it's something we are tracking on. But currently, we are continuing to see it track further south. We can only hope, and I think I might be alone saying that, we'll get a good old-fashioned snowstorm. Shannon?
Oh, no, I think my kids are right along with you. They want to make a snowman.
You bet. You got it.
Thanks, Anwar. So nice to have you with us tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks to you for joining us. We'll see you again tomorrow night at 11.